in what God is doing here at Hope and through Hope around the world. And we're so grateful for your financial partnership. Now, really glad you're here and excited for what God is going to do in our hearts as we hear from his word this morning.
Well, welcome. Glad you chose to join us on this Labor Day weekend. I know that there may be some of us that are in different locations, in different places. Some of you might be at the beach. Some of you might be at a posh little Airbnb. Just letting you know, we're so thankful that you're joining us on that. We'll try to hold it down here, but we're glad that you guys are here with us today. And I had a question for you: is when you hear the word judge, what comes to mind? What comes to mind? Maybe if you're a history buff, you might be thinking, okay, wait, Judge John Marshall, who was a founding father, served as a Secretary of State and a congressman. He also served as the 4th Chief Justice of the United States. He was one of the only men in all of history to serve on all of the different branches that exist in our government. He served as Chief Justice from 1801 to 1835, making him the longest sitting Chief Justice in history and one of the most influential justices ever. There's other of you that you hear the word judge and you automatically think of a 6'7" outfielder from the New York Yankees, Aaron Judge, right? 5-time All-Star, torturer of our own Pete Boel's beloved Red Sox. He was Rookie of the Year in 2017. He also set the single-season home run record at 62, breaking a 61-year-old record that was held by none other than Roger Maris. For others of you, you think of Judge and you're like, there's big hair, big red hair, there's this little fiery woman, Judge Judy, right? Judge Judy, yes. She was on this arbitration-based reality court show that ran from 1996 until April of 2021. 25 seasons of Judge Judy taking in small claims and deciding the cases right there. And it was amazing. As I was looking at this stuff, she was making like $47 million a year in small claims court right there. So yeah, way to go, Judge Judy. 25 years, longest serving TV arbiter. Still others that maybe around in the 90s, and you were thinking of a judge, you think maybe Judge Ito, who he judged and presided over the O.J. Simpson trial during that time. And then there's others of you that think, man, no, I hear judge, and I think of Judge Philip Banks. And you're like, Judge Philip Banks? Like, who is Judge Philip Banks? Well, most notably, Judge Philip Banks took in a young man from West Philadelphia who spent most of his days on the playground, but got in a little fight, and his mom got scared and said, you're moving in with your auntie and uncle in Bel Air, right? Yeah. Judge Philip Banks. He was an actor. He was a judge as well. Now, the role of a judge in real life, I was looking this up, and they preside over hearings. They listen to and read arguments by opposing parties. They determine if the information presented supports the charge, claim, or dispute. They decide if the procedure is being conducted according to the rules and laws. They apply these laws and precedents to reach judgments and to resolve disputes between parties. Now, all the judges I mentioned earlier, some of them were real, some of them were not. They were real people, but some of them were on TV, some of them were in really an actual judge. And actual judges listen to all the facts. They listen to all the witnesses, all the testimony, and then they take all the information that they've gathered and they measure that by the law and the precedent to reach an ultimate decision or judgment. And so for us, as we've mentioned some of these famous judges, I've left out some infamous judges as well. Now, infamous judges, these judges, they don't want to hear all the facts. They rush to pass judgment based on their bias, on their opinion, or their life experience. They're easily swayed by public opinion, and they often measure others by a standard that they don't apply to themselves. And here's the crazy thing about it is we can find some of these infamous judges right here today, because I'm one of them. Because probably sitting out here, if we're really honest with each other, sometimes we're an infamous judge. And we make decisions based on our own bias, on our own experience. We don't listen for all the facts. We don't try to get below the surface and hear any of the other outlying things. We just rush to a judgment and make a judgment. Now, in society, we need judges to make judgments in order to keep order, settle disputes, maintain the law. But when we flip that up and we have judgments and judges in faith in our church, that brings a lot of pain. That can bring a lot of disillusionment. That can bring division when we begin to pull them into that. And Jesus, as we continue teaching about what he was saying on the Mount to all these people, Jesus begins to address what I feel is probably one of the most damaging issues for the church, and that is condemning judgment. Condemning judgment. Condemning judgment comes from a place of self-righteousness. It comes from a place where we think we might be better than somebody else. And he's saying this can't be the way that this goes. This issue of condemning judgment has been the cause of countless people turning away from the local church, from just throwing in the towel and saying, I'm never going back again. It's led to immense pain, and the relational wake that is left behind condemning self-righteous judgment is both deep and wide. So how do we navigate this? And how can so many churches and so many different believers throughout the years, throughout history, even on the Sermon on the Mount, get it so wrong? Well, Jesus knew that his audience that he was speaking to on the Mount, it included men, women, ordinary folks, but it also included a group of people, of religious leaders, basically the leaders of the church of that time. And these guys go by the name of the Pharisees. And this was the people that he battled against consistently. Like the people that got his ire up, that really got under his skin, it was the Pharisees. It was the religious leaders of the time. You would think that Jesus would come and it would be, no, he's going to point out to everybody else who wasn't involved in the church. That's where he would get really angry with that, man, they need to be living a certain way or doing a certain thing. But no, it was the religious leaders that he found himself consistently on opposing sides. And these group of men were dedicated to living life in strict adherence to the law. They even added their own interpretations and laws to restrict others that were trying to follow. They sought righteousness through obedience and works. And from their pious perches came condemning judgment for all that fell short, except for themselves. And so Jesus launches into the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, verse 1, and he says this. He says, do not judge others, and you will not be judged. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. You see, condemning judgment comes from the prideful and the self-righteous. When we deliver any kind of condemning judgment, it's probably either we're arrogant or maybe we're ignorant. That's where I've found in my own life, whenever that comes out of me, that's where it'll come out of. This self-righteousness, this pride. It's people that have closed their eyes to their own sin and shortcomings. They rely on God's grace and forgiveness for themselves while withholding it from others. And this passage tells us that if we refuse to extend grace to others, there's no way that we can expect it for ourselves. And here's the truth, is that no one in all of creation, no one is good enough, long enough to earn heaven. We can't get there. We can't get there on our own. We can't get there through any kind of works, any kind of obedience, any kind of willpower. Therefore, we must extend God's mercy because we We need it. And so we've got to extend his mercy, his grace, and love in the same way that we receive it. Whenever we feel that pride welling up or that self-righteousness welling up, it's almost like we close our eyes. And when our eyes are closed in this regard, self-righteousness begins to take over. Self-awareness is minimal to non-existent. We can't see our own faults. We can't admit that maybe I'm not right 100% of the time. And when our eyes are closed, sin becomes ranked and categorized according to the current palate of the religious. It's almost like we put up this list, and it's like, okay, this is the worst sin. This is, that's not too bad, right? We can do this. I mean, that's not that bad. And so we have this list of sins, and then we begin to put people in order. Oh, they do this? Oh, there's no way. They need to stay over there. Those type of people that do this, oh, they're not the same as this person. Because this person is really, really bad and really messed up. And so we begin to put it in categories. Things that we get okay with, things that we're not okay with. And when that happens, the church becomes a place where people think that Sunday is more critical than Monday through Saturday. Where if we just kind of clean up ourselves and we can put on our masks and we can come in here and I don't need to talk about anything that's below the surface. I don't need to get into a small group that might know exactly what my life looks like the rest of the week. Sunday becomes the critical thing. And if we just say the right things in the right way, look the right way, then everything's going to be okay. When our eyes are closed, Sunday becomes more critical than Monday through Saturday. The church becomes a place when our eyes are closed that people feel that behavior comes before belonging. That you've got to look a certain way, you've got to act a certain way before you will belong within the family of God. When our eyes are closed, the church becomes a place where people experience the sting of this condemning judgment, where they feel on the outside. They feel like, I can never get to that place. Those people that look like they have it all together, man, I'm not worthy of this. I can't do it. But man, when our eyes are wide open, when we open up to our own sin, when we open up to saying, hey, I'm not going to judge others so that I am not judged, when we open that up, compassion, empathy, and mercy rule the day. Self-awareness is elevated when we are able to say, you know what, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm not sure on this, or I might be wrong. When our eyes are open, sin is appropriately made equal, none greater than the next. It basically takes that list and it puts it like this. From the worst to the least amount that we think, God does this, and he says, it's all sin. It's all separation from me. Because God is holy, he is perfect. He can't be a part of any sin out there. And so when we look at this list of sin, he doesn't see a list, he just sees it as flat. It's just separation. I can't be a part of that. And when we begin to see sin the way that God sees sin, it's a lot easier for us then to get rid of the self-righteousness, because we see ourselves, we're all separated. And when our eyes are open, the church becomes a place where people are authentic with their struggles on Sundays so they can be fueled up to love well Monday through Saturday. It's basically going, hey, give me a Monday morning type of faith. I don't want it just to be for the weekends. I don't want it just to look good so that everybody won't ask questions or think that I've got it all together on a Sunday. I want to be able to have a place, a community, a small group where I can come and say, hey, this is what I've been struggling with this week. Or man, this is what I've been struggling with for the past year. Or man, I can't seem to get past this in my own spirit. Would you help me? Where we drag our worst in to this place on a Sunday so that we can be loved into our best and we can love well Monday through Saturday. Man, how attractive is it if it's a community of believers that comes in and says, man, I'm jacked up too. I don't get it right 100% of the time. And what you're seeing right now, I might be saying I'm fine, but inside I'm crumbling. Man, when that happens, then when somebody from the outside comes in, they go, oh, these are my people. Why? Because we are all in desperate need of God's grace. We all need his power. We all need the Spirit inside of us, giving the ability to do what he asks us to do. And so when our eyes are wide open, the church also becomes a place where people feel belonging leads to behavior and not the other way around. Where you can come in and it's like, hey, you know what? You belong no matter what. Just because you came into the building, we're going to love you. You belong. You're here. We all need God's grace. We all fall short. You come on in. Because truly behavior in this context, that's this work of the Spirit. I don't think he ever calls us to be the police of everybody else's behavior. It's we need to love people and say, hey, you know what? You belong. You come in here, and once you belong, then the Spirit begins to do the work to correct and transform and renew our minds and our behavior. When our eyes are open, the church becomes a place where people experience the warmth of unconditional acceptance. There's not any other place you can find it on earth. There's no other relationship that truly offers that 100% of the time, where there's no strings attached. Where we say, it doesn't matter what you believe, what you think, where you've been, what your road looks like, what your journey has been up to this point. All that matters is that you're here and there's a loving God with arms open wide. The church should be filled with the most humble, most loving people on earth because our eyes are open to our desperate need for grace. And when we see that in somebody else, it's not, hey, I need to fix you. I need to point this out. I need to judge you. It is, man, I want you to find what I found because I have found forgiveness in a relationship with Jesus Christ. And when we see somebody struggling, it should be almost like a mirror is focused back around to us. And going, man, I have struggled with that. I deal with that sometimes. Or man, God has brought me through in this way, through that same struggle you're having right now. We should see our own flaws in the struggles of others, and our hearts should break because we know what it's like. And we know that we have a God that says, you know what? I've got a solution. And it's a relationship with my son, Jesus Christ. You see, Jesus came to fulfill the law, not to enforce it. He didn't come to point out all the different areas where you got wrong. So in his church, when he established it, it shouldn't be a police station for the rest of the world to where they can come and figure out what they're doing wrong. It should be a place to say, no, none of us can fulfill it. It's only been fulfilled by one individual, and that's Jesus Christ. And through that, I have grace, I have mercy, and I have the ability to become who he created me to be. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says this: judging others makes us blind. Basically, our eyes become closed. Whereas loving is illuminating. By judging others, we blind ourselves to our own evil and to the grace which others are just as entitled to as we are. Just as entitled to as we are. When Jesus allowed himself to stay on that cross for each and every one of us, it was for that entire list. No matter what it looks like, no matter how bad it was, that entire list, Jesus said, I'd die for it. And then I'm going to call you who want to follow me, you're going to need to love them the way that I love them. And see sin as separation. And let love illuminate this offer of grace that comes through Christ. You see, it was difficult for me. There's been points in my life where this has been more or less troublesome to be able to look at maybe other people or look at other groups and go, man, why don't you just get it right? But then every single time I'm confronted with my own stuff, it brings me right back to it going, God, forgive me. Forgive me for being an infamous judge. Jesus moves on in verse 3 and it says this: why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? It's an interesting illustration, isn't it? I mean, to think about it, a log. Like that's what I think of in a log. I'm not talking about like a little stick. I'm talking about a log. A log is in your eye and we are worried about the specks in others in somebody else's eye. Now we know when something's in our eye. Every single one of us has had a moment where a little tiny like piece of dust or something gets in your eye and it just like sends you into crazy world. And it's like, I got to do anything and everything to get this out. You're like pulling the eyelid out, pushing it down, holding it there, letting it tear a little bit. You're squirting stuff in there. Maybe you've got a loved one that sees you struggling and they're like, oh, here, let me see. And you're like, no, I do not need anybody's other's fingers poking around in my eye. Because the eye is a gentle thing. It's a delicate thing, and you don't want anything in there. I went to the eye doctor for the very first time this past week. First time in all of my life, I went to the eye doctor. And I go, and they put me on this little machine, and then my face is down in there. And then she's getting ready to do it. She's like, be ready for a little puff of air. And I'm like, what? You know, it's like, oh, my goodness, what is going on? What are you doing to me? This is torture. No. But we don't like anything in there, and we know when something is off, even if it's little. Wouldn't you think that like some people know that there's stuff in their own eye? And maybe they're just like you, and it's hard to get through it sometimes. So why can't we extend grace to them? Because when judging comes to people's behaviors and choices and lifestyles, it almost seems like we revert to like this middle school relational courtroom where the object is to point out everybody else's flaws before they find out your own. Like, think about that for a second. In middle school, take yourself back to middle school, whenever that was. It's all about like, if I could just hide long enough so people don't see that like I've got all this junk going on, so I'm gonna point out all these other people's stuff so that they won't like focus in on me. And you might think, man, that's middle school. That's a long time ago. Okay. Let's think about work. Where that one person is not around the water cooler or around the lunch table, and then everybody begins to pick at different things about that. Man, if they would just get this right and do this right and really kind of come through, then I could be able to do my job and we'd be able to hit our number. If only they would. Or man, that other department, those people up on the 5th floor. Or take it to a family reunion where one family member doesn't show up. Or maybe it's a couple. And then it becomes like, hey, let's just, and you're talking with your family and it's like, oh, then we just talk about what's going on in their life instead of talking about what's going on in ours. You see, it gets real easy to point out specks, because if we point out enough of other people's specks, then we don't really have to talk about the log that is sitting in our eye. And Jesus has got a word for that. In verse 5, he says this, hypocrite, with an exclamation, hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Is there ever another word that has divided so many as hypocrite? Probably one of the biggest complaints about the church of all time is people that are outside the church look at the church and go, they're just a bunch of hypocrites. And instead of saying, yes, we are, because that's what we are, every single one of us. I truly believe this. If we could have a church that would just say, yes, we are filled with hypocrites because we want to get it right and we can't this side of heaven. But we've got a God that forgives me every single time. If we did that, there would be more people that would flood into this place, and we'd have to have not just the 5 p.m., but so many other different services throughout the weekend, because people would finally go, oh, you too? But instead, we try to hide, and we try to justify, and we try to, come up with all the reasons of why we are the way that we are. If we would just say, man, I fall short, but I have a God that didn't. And he tells me that I'm a masterpiece. I don't know how it all works. I just know that I was lost and now I'm found. And notice also in this passage that it says, whose eye are we talking about in this? A friend's eye, right? This isn't saying, hey, we should go around telling all the strangers. Like, no, if we are ever to point out a speck in anybody's eye, it better be behind relationship. And not with just people that are out there that we think need to get their stuff together. It's not that. It's a friend. It's a friend's eye. You see, because if we have rules without relationship, it equals rebellion. It equals judgment. I mean, think about that. If somebody doesn't have a relationship with you and just says, hey, here's all the things I want you to do, you automatically, there's a part of you that goes, no, I'm going to go the opposite way in this. Why? Because they didn't have a relationship with you. But if that person has a relationship with you, that you've done a little bit of life together, and that person comes and says, man, I know that I fall short as well, but man, I know you've said you've wanted to be this, and maybe you've taken a step to this. How are you doing? That's really different. That's not coming in as condemning judgment. That's coming as somebody coming alongside me and trying to help me. If we truly want to help someone change, we need to love them first. Because again, belonging comes before behavior ever gets changed. And so how do we do this? How do we kind of begin to apply some of this stuff? And know this, one of the reasons I truly love Hope is because I think what God has been doing is creating a safe place for people that are in process. We're okay with process. That's one of the reasons why I think people come. That's one of the reasons why I love being a part of the staff at Hope, is because we're going to be okay with the mess, the messiness of life. But we always have to think, how do I need to correct myself? How do I need to check myself? Whenever I feel that judgment welling up, how do I check myself? The first thing is this, is focus on your own log. We have to focus in on our own log. All the stuff that's going on in our life, this needs to be the focus with white-hot intensity before we begin to talk about all these other ways. Because the way that we deal with and struggle with our own log, the way that we are self-aware with our own log and our own failures might just be the thing that somebody who's watching you do that and struggle well might then come to you and go, hey, I've noticed you struggled really well in the midst of this, and I've been dealing with some of the same stuff. Could you help me? And then it's time to be able to speak into that. Maybe, just maybe, they're going to see ourselves. They've seen us overcome some of the same things and how our faith played a critical role. And then they're going to come to see who Jesus is through that relationship by the way that you deal with your own stuff. The way they see God and his forgiveness allow you to find peace and joy in the midst of hard circumstances. Self-awareness, I think, might just be the best case for a loving God. To be able to say, and an all-powerful God, to be able to say, hey, I don't know if I'm completely right, but this is what I've experienced. This is where I'm at. The second thing is this. We need to remove the phrase, those people or other people, from our vocabulary. Like if I find, that's a check for me. Once I find myself saying those people or other people, then it's like, I need to check that. There's a great story in Luke 18, starting in verse 9, says this. Then Jesus told this story to some who had great confidence in their own righteousness and scorned everyone else. He said, 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a despised tax collector. He's setting up a joke, right? Like 2 men go into a temple, a tax collector and a Pharisee. So he says this, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I'm certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give you 1/10 of my income. But the tax collector, he stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. I tell you, this sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. My prayer is that we can never get to a spot where Pharisee in this passage could be replaced with a hoper. Somebody that called hope home comes in and talks about those people or other people. We need to be, come on in, all who need grace and mercy. This is a safe place to be you because we've all fallen short. We all have a deep need for this grace, and we can all see ourselves in the lives of others. And the final thing is this, is that we need to build a bridge before we speak. Build a bridge before we speak. There's still a place for us to sharpen one another. Don't hear me say that. That, oh, okay, we don't need to sharpen each other. We don't need to speak truth to anything. We don't need to exhort each other. There's still places for that, but it's within the confines of a relationship. It's done from a place of gentleness, of humility, of love and relationship, with our eyes wide open to our own mess, our own depravity, our own dependence on grace. When it flows through that, that's the time when we can speak. But we shouldn't judge or hold accountable someone we haven't built a relational bridge strong enough to handle the weight of the words that we're about to say. We have to build a relational bridge strong enough to sustain the words we're about to deliver to them. And so in that moment, we've got to earn the right to be heard with people and then speak through humility and trust the Spirit to do what the Spirit's going to do. He doesn't need us for anything. He includes us in the process for what it does for us. So if you get to a spot where you're like, if I don't say this one word to this one person, they might not ever know that they are messed up, and they might not ever know that they might not ever come to Christ, to a relationship with him. That's thinking too much of ourselves and putting our spirit into a box. The Holy Spirit's going to do what the Holy Spirit's going to do. We just need to be faithful to love. We need to be faithful to deliver help when it's asked for. We need his help to dispense grace and dispense mercy through humility. This week's heavy, and it's hard. And maybe for some of you it hits home. I know it did for me as I was getting prepared for this. I just want to take just a moment. If you would, just close your eyes right where you're at. Bow your head. And maybe just do a little spiritual check for your own self. Where do you find yourself right now? Are the majority of your words dispensing grace, love, mercy? When you see other people, do you see yourself in their struggles? I want to read our passage one more time to you. As your eyes are closed, this is going to be from the message, and just allow the Spirit to speak to your heart. It says this: don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, let me wash your face for you, when your own face is distorted by contempt? It's this whole traveling roadshow mentality all over again, playing a holier-than-thou part instead of just living your part. Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be fit to offer a washcloth to your neighbor. Father, I just pray that you continue to work in our spirit. That you continue to bring to light the areas we've kept hidden from others. Bring to light the areas where we have rushed to judgment. God, forgive us for the times that maybe we have caused pain or division with our words. God, I pray that you rise up within us the ability to rest in your grace and rest in your mercy in a way that shows you off to the world around us. That God, through our humility, through our gentleness, through the way that we love, that there will be people that come to know who you are. And then, God, as we become aware of our own log, of our own ugly sneer, and you wipe it clean. God, use us in whatever way you want to make you famous and to allow others around us to come to a saving knowledge of who you are. God, thanks for not giving up on us. Thank you for always, always forgiving. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.